The 84th Regiment of Foot was a British regiment in the American Revolutionary War that was raised to defend present-day Ontario, Quebec and Atlantic Canada from the constant land and sea attacks by American revolutionaries. The 84th Regiment was also involved in offensive action in the 13 colonies, including North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia and what is now Maine, as well as raids upon Lake Champlain and the Mohawk Valley. The regiment consisted of 2,000 men in 20 companies. The 84th Regiment was raised from Scottish soldiers who had served in the 7 Years' War and stayed in North America. As a result, the 84th Regiment had one of the oldest and most experienced officer corps of any regiment in North America. The Scottish Highland Regiments were a key element of the British Army in the American Revolution. The 84th Regiment was clothed, armed and accoutred the same as the Black Watch, with Lieutenant Colonel Alan Maclean commanding the 1st Battalion and Major General John Small of Strathardle commanding the 2nd. The two battalions operated independently of each other and saw little action together. Lt. Colonel Alan Maclean, Commander, 1st Battalion; Major General John Small, Commander, 2nd Battalion, 1st Battalion. Historical context: Quebec and Ontario. The British province of Quebec was the target of an invasion by Continental Army forces in 1775. Lieutenant Colonel Alan Maclean, Commander, 1st Battalion. The distinguished war hero, Lieutenant Colonel Alan Maclean of Torlewisque, was authorized by Lieutenant General Thomas Gage to raise a regiment from Scottish communities in Canada, New York and the Carolinas. The 84th Highland Regiment was the first to be raised from American Loyalists. The soldiers were drawn from those who had served Britain in the 7 Years' War, the 42nd Regiment of Foot, 77th Regiment of Foot, and 78th Regiment of Foot. The prospect of raising regiments in the 13 colonies was a dangerous mission. Only 2 battalions of the 5 originally requested were raised because of the difficulty of recruiting. When Maclean arrived in New York not long after the war broke out, he was warned not to disembark in his uniform for fear of attack. As a result, when traveling alone he dressed as a doctor. The dangers of recruiting American Loyalists became even clearer after the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge in North Carolina. Battle of Moores Creek Bridge, North Carolina. Members of the 84th Highland Regiment were in the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge, North Carolina in early 1776. On the 27th of February 1776, the 84th Regiment, with a number of new recruits, was marching to the port of Wilmington, North Carolina. There they were to join with a force arriving from Europe and participate in operations in the southern colonies. The recruited force, at first numbering 1,600 American Loyalists, but reduced during the march by desertions to fewer than 800, faced off against 1,000 American patriots. The American Loyalists' movement was blocked by Patriot forces on 2 occasions, but the Loyalists managed to bypass them to reach the bridge over Widow Moores Creek. Captain McLeod, who had survived the Battle of Bunker Hill, was killed leading the charge at Moores Creek Bridge. Half of the regiment was captured and 30 were killed, with 96 officers and men taken prisoner. The majority of the Carolina recruits were never able to join the regiment since the Loyalist forces were scattered after the battle. Lt. Col. Donald MacDonald helped with the recruiting in North Carolina and fought in the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge. Both Maclean and MacDonald were taken prisoner. Sorel, Quebec, Headquarters, 1st Battalion. In 1777 the headquarters moved from Quebec to Sorel. Military operations: Quebec under Maclean's command. The 1st Battalion acted primarily to defend Quebec from American Patriot forces. It marched from Quebec in an attempt to repel Brigadier General Richard Montgomery's invasion in the siege of Fort St. John, Quebec. The regiment made 2 attempts to relieve the fort, but eventually returned to Quebec, where it helped to stiffen the resolve of the civil population until Carleton's return from Montreal. The regiment was also involved in the Battle of Quebec. At a crucial moment in the battle, Captain McDougall led 120 of the 84th and 60 Royal Navy sailors against a force of New Hampshire troops commanded by Henry Dearborn. They overwhelmed Dearborn's men, forcing the survivors to surrender. Military operations. 13 colonies later in the war, they took part in raids upon Lake Champlain in 1778 and into the Mohawk Valley in 1780. 1781 and 1782.